Okay, so this video covers the creation of the screens and grates for the back part of the Panther. So, going to need to start out with some really fine, I use Christmas ribbon for this, but there's a few different sources of this sort of thing. It's really, really fine, thin mesh. And these round parts that we cut out of index card paper in the beginning, we're going to glue them onto that screen with some 4-to-1 glue. So I've already got some here, but it's a little bit tricky sometimes getting these to stick quite right, so I do want to cover this quickly. Generally what I'll do is use 4-to-1 glue on one side of the circle. It's not always easy to get these even on there. So you really want to make sure before you glue them on that they're nice and flat, so you get an even bond. And then just have a way to hold them so they're not sitting flat on a surface that they're just going to glue to. So I used a mini clothespin, but there's a few different methods of, you can just set them across two things, however you like to do it. Anyways, you'll end up with a couple of things like this. We're just going to cut them out. And you don't want any of that stuff overhanging, or it will look funny when it's painted. So there we go. One of those. Now for these square grates here, you're going to need to take some drywall fiber tape and cut it in half lengthways, is what I would suggest to do. And you're just going to lay it so it's a double layer. But you want all of the thick, see how there's thicker strands going one way and thinner strands going the other way? You want all the thick strands laying on top of each other and all the thin ones offset. So instead of squares, they're rectangles. And it can be a little bit challenging to do at first, but just try to keep your eye on one of the thin, make sure if it goes into the center between the two on either side, should be fairly even the whole way along. Often you can pull them apart and try again if you don't quite line them up right. You can also adjust their position slightly when they're stuck together just by pushing them around a little bit with your fingers. Anyways, when you have that, then you want to just cut off all the little bits and ends and cut strips that have 4 spaces or 5 thin lines. Right? And you have a strip like this, and then we're just going to cut out from that strip. You want 3 spaces long and 4 spaces high, essentially. So there's a bit, and then we have to trim the end. Okay, and that gives us 4 of those. So now, I'll just cut this out quickly, and we can install some of this. Now, there's a center of these. These are actually, I believe they're fans, and there's a center part to it. And you can use a few different sorts of materials to cover that. Now, I'm using the paper wadding, essentially, from inside a 12-ring cap. You can use a 2.5mm Google Eye back if you want, but I find the paper is a lot thinner, and you don't actually want it coming up. You don't want it raised very much, so I just use these really thin paper backings, and I just used a needle to just fit under the backing and pull them out. Now, the one thing you have to watch out for is that they'll sometimes go off in your face if you're rough at all with them. So be really gentle when you're prying these out. They come out pretty easy. The other thing you can do to get them out is to kind of fill the things with water. Then they definitely won't explode, but you have to wait for them to dry before you can use them. And then once you've got them out, you just flatten them against the table surface like that. Anyways, I like those. I find them really thin, and they work really nice for this. Okay, so continuing with 4-to-1 glue. Now, you can remember when we put these hinges here, if they overlap this circle here, I suggest putting this one on first, so you can tell if it's going to fit in place. This one is, so I don't need to move that one out. But if, say, that hinge was too big, then I'd slightly move this one over to compensate so they'd look the same, both sides. So you just pop those into position. And we'll do these next. Now with these, if there's any bits overhanging the thin on the ends, you definitely want to remove those. Okay, almost ready. And those were just, if you can see these, you sometimes don't always get them perfectly trimmed along this line. So there's a little bit of overlap, and you should try to remove those if you can. It looks a little nicer if they are removed. And again, we're going to put this one on first because it's the only one that can have a hinge interfere with it, and we want to know if that's going to happen. And don't worry if the thing isn't exactly the same size as the symbol. It all will work in the end. You just want to have them even so that they all look the same as each other, and it'll be fine. This one. Now we can place these. I'll try not to use a whole lot of glue for this because it will affect how much you can see the grating. If you get glue all over the place rather than just under where you're putting this, then it will sort of affect the look of it. try to get that nice and centered. And if you're using the wadding and it doesn't come out nice and round, just get another one. There. Pretty easy to get. Press down nice and flat right in the middle. We'll leave that to dry, and that's our grates and screens from the for the Panther. Getting toward the end.